A long sword stood in the battlefield, and a pair of hands pulled it up before swinging it down fiercely at the enemy. Suddenly, a cavalryman charged onto the battlefield, only to be struck down from his horse by a member of the Knights Templar wielding an axe. This was the battle between the Templars and the French army. Landry looked towards the battlefield and saw a familiar figure, King Philip of France. This was the perfect opportunity for revenge for Joan. Landry shouted out to King Philip, who was evidently waiting for this moment as well. One was the hatred of taking his wife, and the other was the hatred of taking his love. So the two of them stopped talking and directly started to launch their attacks. Landry swung his sword, but Philip was well armored and took no damage. As the fight continued, Landry was unable to inflict any harm on Philip. As a king, Philip is quite powerful. Landry pressed his sword against Philip's chest, angrily accusing him of killing Joan. Philip countered that it was Landry who had caused Joan's death, claiming she could have peacefully lived as his queen had Landry not disrupted that peace. Philip's sword pierced through Landry's armor, and he could hear the sound of metal cutting into flesh as he was forcefully pushed to the ground. When he stood up again, he had lost his advantage. Philip slashed at Landry's thigh, showcasing his improved swordsmanship. Philip's blade stabbed through his body, and then he delivered another blow from behind. Philip intended for Landry to witness the judgment of the king's sword. Just then, Landry jolted awake, realizing it had all been a dream. It felt so real that it left him breathless. A baby's cry pulled Landry back to reality. He picked up his daughter, unsure of how to soothe her. He began to sing, and to his relief, the baby stopped crying. As he looked at his daughter swaddled in his arms and then up at the sky, Landry made a decision. He entrusted his daughter to Tancred. Although he loved her dearly and wished to care for her, keeping the child with him wouldn't be wise. The king would surely be looking for him everywhere, and he didn't want his daughter to live in danger. Tancred assured him that he would take the child to a place where no one would know her and let her grow up safely there. When he asked Landry where he planned to go, Landry replied that he would head to the shrine of Chartra. He intended to go to the Knights Templar headquarters to apologize to the Grand Master and his brothers, seeking their forgiveness. Tancred thought this was not a wise choice, considering that the battle in the forest of Versailles had resulted in heavy losses for the Templars. As a result, most of the knights harbored deep resentment towards Landry. After hearing this, Landry felt it was even more imperative that he seek atonement. He had always been a Knight Templar, and without the shrine, he didn't know what else he could do. Therefore, he needed to seek God's forgiveness. Seeing Landry's determination, Tancred could do nothing to stop him. Before leaving, Tancred mentioned that he would have the child baptized and asked Landry what her name would be. After some thought, Landry chose the name Eve for his daughter. After escorting Eve away, Landry mounted his horse and rode toward the shrine of Chartra. The people here did not welcome him, and he was no longer the leader of the Paris Templars, because it was Landry himself who buried the Knights of Paris. Following a signal from the Grand Master, members of the Order immediately launched their attack on Landry. 2 Templars helped him up but took away everything that belonged to him as a knight. Once again, Landry was knocked to the ground by the Templars, and he was subsequently expelled from the Order. Landry remained outside the city gates for 3 weeks. Every week, he would bang on the doors, and the guards grew increasingly annoyed. They told him they had never let him in before, and they wouldn't be opening the gates now, as the Grand Master had decided to expel him. Yet, Landry continued to kneel outside, undeterred by the weather. One rainy day, the Grand Master watched Landry from the citadel, and his heart began to waver. He saw that Landry was a warrior who shouldn't just die outside like this. Thus, he sent Tancred to bring Landry back into the city. Members of the Templar were divided and argued over whether or not Landry should be allowed to rejoin. The Grand Master found their squabbling foolish and ultimately decided to hold a vote regarding Landry's fate. And Landry is going to be retraining with the newcomers to test to see if they have what it takes to be a Templar. Meanwhile, in the French royal palace, Philip and William de Nogaret were discussing matters of state. William reported that he had been searching nationwide for Landry, but so far, there was no news. Isabella was present, listening to their conversation about Landry. Philip expressed his desire to declare war on the Templars and directly assault the shrine of Chartra. However, William advised against such an action, as it would equate to declaring war on the papacy itself. Currently, they were in no position to wage war, especially since France owed a debt to the church. If the war were to commence, the church would demand repayment, leading to severe financial problems. William suggested that King Philip spread rumors to sway public opinion in their favor, but first, they needed to resolve another matter. One of the guards openly spreads the news that Philip killed Queen Joan, and the soldier is arrested for it. This news is the exact opposite of what the king himself has been spreading. According to Philip, it was Landry who killed Queen Joan, but the captured squire in front of him was there at the time, and he was adamant that it was Philip who did it. In front of everyone, Philip cruelly ordered the guard's tongue to be cut out.
No!
The vote to decide Landry's fate began. Tancred cast the first affirmative vote, but after voting concluded, the result was a tie. At this time, only one Templar named Naaman did not vote. His vote would determine whether Landry would stay or go. After Naaman voted, the Grand Master immediately announced that Landry would join the Knights Templar as a new recruit. Training begins at this point, with Tancred helping Landry cut his hair, symbolizing a new life. The recruits had to carry 2 bags of stones and run laps. These bags weighed the same as the armor worn by the Templars. This exercise was designed to help them adapt quickly to the feeling of wearing armor. The head of the regiment in charge of training the new recruits voted against Landry's retention not long ago, and Landry's future training could be grueling. Most of the new recruits came from noble families and had willingly relinquished their inheritances to join the Templars and become servants of God. Due to their backgrounds, these young men had mostly endured psychological rather than physical hardships. After walking a few rounds with 2 bags of stones on their backs, one of them fell down. Landry went up to help the young man, only to be kicked aside by the head recruit. He then stated that everyone had to work their way into the Templars on their own, just mind your own business, and that if you dared to disobey the head, you would be expelled outright. At that moment, a group of cavalry charged recklessly through the streets of Paris. The leader rode into the hall and dismounted in front of the king. When he took off his cloak, Isabella excitedly called out his name. Louis was the eldest son of Philip and Queen Joan. He was kneeling in front of his father, and several of the ringed fingers were lying in Louis's hand. These were the fingers of the old aristocrats, remnants of the old power from the Pope's faction, now converted into new nobility loyal to King Philip. Philip embraced his son joyfully, and Isabella warmly hugged her brother. Louis didn't have a good relationship with William. He directly ordered William to take his horse out and clean it, viewing him as nothing more than a groom. At that moment, Louis was still unaware that his mother had died, and he inquired about her. When he learned of her passing, he was devastated and smashed a chair in his grief. Philip told him that Landry had killed Queen Joan, and Louis was consumed with rage, eager to take revenge on Landry. Louis had a close relationship with his mother, and if he discovered that it was Philip who had killed her, it was uncertain what he might do. In an underground fighting arena, a burly man was relentlessly attacking an opponent lying on the ground. The atmosphere among the spectators was electric, and the victor was rewarded with a bag of gold coins before leaving. The host introduced the next pair of contestants. The first one to appear was a strong man who never left any chance for his opponent to survive. Then came the former crusaders. He was seen sipping his drink and walking slowly over to what turned out to be Gawain. It is really sad that he has to rely on boxing to make a living now. The burly fighter, relying on his size and strength, swung his weapon wildly. Gawain dodged easily, but the strong man was beaten badly. Following the big man's defeat, he got back up and continued swinging his axe. Gawain killed the opponent directly with the weapon in his hand. The audience shouted and cheered excitedly. The young boy shouted desperately for his mother and father, but as he looked at his parents bound to the stake, he felt utterly helpless. All he could do was watch as the priest set the wooden platform ablaze with a torch. His parents had committed no heinous crime. They were simply Cathars who claimed to be Christians, and for this, they were to suffer the brutal punishment of burning at the stake. The boy cried out, pleading for mercy, but the priest remained unmoved. The parents were engulfed in flames in front of their children, and the priest was still talking about his so-called justice. After the fire had burned down, the boy scooped up a handful of ash from the charred remains and placed it in a bag. Prince Louis dug out his mother, Queen Joan, from behind the scenes. In tears, he asked his father why they had to desecrate her body and subject her to disembowelment even after her death. The only reason for this gruesome act was that the queen's child with Landry was still alive. The king then gave Prince Louis a task. He was not confident in giving this task to anyone other than him. King Philip instructed Louis to find Landry and eliminate the queen's child. King Philip had finally decided to marry Princess Isabella off to England. Although the princess was unwilling, she had no other choice at that moment. King Philip said that Isabella's mother was dead, and even if Joan was still alive, it would not change anything. Just then, William brought news that Pope Boniface had arrived in Paris, claiming to mourn Queen Joan. William suspected the Pope was only there to aggravate the king. He never appeared when it was beneficial, but only when it could worsen the situation. As the Pope entered the palace, he called out King Philip's name and raised his right hand, gesturing for the king to kiss his ring. King Philip was visibly displeased, and everyone glanced at him, but he directed his gaze at William and nodded slightly. Receiving the signal, William stepped forward to kiss the Pope's ring. The Pope stated that he had come to mourn Queen Joan, but King Philip was reluctant to discuss that topic. He preferred to talk about a decree the Pope had drafted regarding the relationship between secular and religious authority. Although the Pope was initially hesitant to speak on the matter, the king insisted, prompting the Pope to oblige.
And so, I declare that submission on the part of every man, be he serf, or royal councillor, or king.
As the Pope spoke the words, King Philip clenched his fists in anger. William found Gawain and asked him to do something. Once completed, it could lead to great opportunities for him. Gawain arrived at a residence defended by several guards. Using just a single coin, he managed to take down all the guards. Though Gawain was unexpectedly injured in the process, he successfully neutralized the guards, and William soon appeared. William opened the door to find the Pope sitting inside. He began telling the Pope a story about his childhood, revealing that the priest in question was now Pope Boniface. William had been quietly waiting for a chance for revenge. He couldn't comprehend how a so-called compassionate and loving faith could permit such a hypocritical priest to ascend to the papacy. Ever since his parents' deaths, he had lost faith in the clergy and no longer believed in heaven or hell. The Pope remembered William's parents, but he still didn't think he was wrong. At this point, he felt William was acting out of personal vengeance, implying that this was not the king's intention. Clearly, the Pope had overestimated his own standing. By the time he spoke of the edict he had drafted, he had already lost the king, a devout believer. William punched the Pope, knocking him down, and the Pope called for Gawain's help. Recognizing Gawain as a Knight Templar, the Pope sought his assistance. However, Gawain stated that he was once a Templar, but was no longer one, and turned away. The king had already decided to oust Pope Boniface and would support a more rational pope in his place. As for how to facilitate the Pope's resignation, that was entirely up to William. William tightened his grip on the Pope's neck and informed him that he would be buried alongside heretics after death. The revenge of more than 20 years was finally taken, and William took out the bag containing the burnt ashes of his parents. Landry, as a recruit, returned to the shrine of Chartra in secrecy with Tancred and others. They planned to retrieve the gold hidden in a secret room beneath the shrine. The group quickly dispatched 2 guards and concealed their bodies elsewhere, but they failed to clean up the blood left behind. They hurriedly collected the gold and prepared to escape, pushing open the door to the secret chamber. Just then, a patrolling guard spotted the blood on the ground and summoned more guards. As the battle was about to break out, a new soldier was shot in the thigh by a crossbow and fell down, and then he was hit by another arrow. To protect his comrades, Landry disregarded the captain's orders and left the formation to engage the enemy in close combat. The captain had no choice but to join the fight, taking out several crossbowmen as the battle intensified. Landry ultimately failed to save the recruits, and one recruit even hid because he was nervous. Fortunately, they managed to escape with the gold back to Chartra safely. In the end, 2 members of the Templar Order lost their lives, the recruit and a Knight Templar named Naaman, who had cast the crucial vote for Landry's return. The captain looked at the 2 dead men, and the implication of his words was that it was because Landry disobeyed orders that the devout soldiers died. But the team leader still wanted Landry to leave, as he felt that Landry brought bad luck. Landry had no words to defend himself and instead took up a whip in the middle of the night to punish himself and seek atonement. The new recruit's captain watched him from a distance, nodding in acknowledgement. After experiencing life and death, Landry's relationship with the recruits became more amicable. They were challenged to a wall climbing contest on a rainy day. The walls outside were extremely slippery, and the first few groups of recruits failed the challenge, facing 2 days without food as a result. The other recruits in Landry's group asked how he had succeeded previously. Landry admitted that this challenge hadn't existed when he was a recruit. However, a remark from the new recruit's captain sparked an idea in him. United in spirit, they decided that since there were no ladders, they would make a human ladder. Landry and another recruit acted as the base while the others climbed up. Even though a human wall had been built, it still wasn't high enough. Landry decided to support himself alone at the bottom and let another recruit climb up. He bore all the weight, and although the recruit fell halfway up, he did not give up.
Get up before my back breaks!
Ultimately, the recruit managed to reach the top of the wall and asked the captain if he could throw down a rope, to which the captain agreed. Landry's group succeeded in the challenge, resulting in a slight smile at the captain's lips. During the night, Landry discovers that one of the recruits is keeping a scroll from his mother. The recruit believed that as long as he recited it daily, he wouldn't die a tragic death. However, Landry warned him that carrying personal items would lead to punishment if discovered, advising him to get rid of it quickly. The recruit agreed but was reported the very next day. The informer received no reward. As the Templar Order had no need for traitors among their ranks, Landry attempted to take the blame, but the captain saw through his scheme. As a result, everyone was punished and forced to carry sandbags until sunset. Landry and several others did not go as the team leader assigned them other tasks. He instructed them to find a suitable tree stump for physical training, cut it down, strip the bark, and carry it back on foot. However, completing this task before dark was impossible. With their tools in hand, they began chopping trees, but it grew dark as they stripped the bark. Suddenly, they heard a woman scream. Landry suggested extinguishing the torches, and then went to have a look with the tools he could use for combat. They discovered a group of Satanists conducting a ritual, outnumbering them far too much to rescue the poor woman. They could only watch helplessly as she was harmed. Just as they turned to leave, a figure wearing a goat's head mask stood behind them. Without hesitation, Landry charged at the foe, and soon, more assailants appeared. 3 of them held the front line while 2 stayed back. A woman suddenly appeared from behind and knocked a man to the ground. The shouting of the recruits attracted the believers who were performing a ceremony in the distance. After dispatching the enemies in front, Landry carried the injured recruit back toward the shrine. Upon returning, they realized the wounded recruit could not be saved. The Grand Master ordered Draper to take a few brothers to investigate the whereabouts of the Satanists and report back. Landry insisted on accompanying them, but the captain declined his request. Draper and several Knights Templar entered a small grove, but they were ambushed, and all perished. The Satanists couldn't have possessed such advanced weaponry. The ambushers were none other than Prince Louis and his men. After killing them, Louis took their clothing. Meanwhile, Landry prayed at the shrine but was unexpectedly captured by members of the order. While they couldn't expel him, they branded a red-hot cross onto his chest, leaving him permanently marked. Disguised in the Knights Templar attire, Prince Louis and his allies arrived at a household. His objective was the infant being cared for by this family. Prince Louis used the name of the Knights Templar to find Landry's child, and then framed the Knights Templar. It was a sinister plot. Landry awakens from a terrifying dream in which he is covered in blood, holding a bloodied sword, and sees all his brothers slain, with no survivors. This dream leaves him uneasy, and he begins to doubt whether he has been abandoned by God. Meanwhile, the cross branded on his chest the night before still throbs with pain. In the early morning, another piece of bad news came. Draper, who was sent by the Grand Commander to find the villain, was carried back. The brother who had always been with Landry passed away unfortunately, and Landry was in great pain. Landry angrily confronts the Grand Master, demanding to know why he wasn't allowed to go with Draper.
And I'd be burying you as well.
With a heavy heart, Landry cleans Draper's body and places 2 coins on his eyes, bidding farewell to his friend. After composing himself, Landry turns his attention to training the new recruits. The training involves loosening the reins on horseback and fighting with both hands. Landry expertly dons his helmet, wielding a sword in one hand and a shield in the other. He swiftly maneuvers around a dummy and returns to his starting position, impressing the new recruits. However, when it's the new recruits' turn, chaos ensues. One recruit falls off his horse while attempting a turn. The Grand Master is displeased. As they are expecting the new recruits to fight against seasoned villains in the forest, Landry negotiated with the captain, thinking that it was too dangerous to let the new recruits fight against experienced villains. But the captain insisted that the new recruits were knights on the first day they joined the knights and should be ready to fight at any time. So, Landry decided to play the enemy to test whether the recruits were capable of going to the battlefield. The Grand Master agrees but stipulates that Landry must fight on foot. Landry effortlessly dodges the attacks of the mounted recruits, even dismounting one of them. When a second recruit attacks, Landry handles him with ease. The third recruit has his horse taken by Landry, who then approaches the Grand Master, asserting that the recruits are not yet ready for battle. The Grand Master responds that anyone who dies in the service of gods will die an honorable death. Landry took this to heart. At dinner, when new recruits asked him about his former training experiences, Landry changed his helpful demeanor and didn't say a word. The leader of the new recruits informed the new recruits that the Grand Master had declared war on the forest villains, and that the new recruits would join the Knights Templar to fight. After the Grand Master leaves, the recruits are filled with anxiety, fearing they might meet the same fate as their fallen brothers. Landry simply tells them that they are adults and must face their own fears. He then leaves the table. That night, instead of going to bed, Landry visits Tancred. Tancred informs him that the villain's hideout has been located, and the Knights Templar will launch an attack at dawn. Landry, unusually calm, thanks Tancred for taking care of his daughter Eve and for his unwavering trust. Tancred is puzzled by Landry's demeanor, but the two embrace. After the others fall asleep, Landry quietly gets up, retrieves weapons from the armory, and takes a horse. He glances at the sanctuary before leading through a secret passage. Unbeknownst to him, a wakeful new recruit witnesses his departure. Meanwhile, in the Paris palace, William brings Gawain to meet King Philip. Prince Louis is intrigued by Gawain, but the king is displeased that Gawain does not kneel before him, due to a leg injury. Gawain was introduced to the king by William, so William felt embarrassed when he saw the scene. He asked Gawain why he didn't behave well in front of the king, but Gawain said that he could only behave well if he had money. Gawain took the money and turned away. Prince Louis's wife, Margaret, returns to Paris and has a cordial relationship with the prince. But when she talked to Princess Isabella, she always regarded herself as the future Queen of France. Margaret kept talking about Louis becoming king, which made Isabella very unhappy. William pulled the bishop out of the bathtub. When the bishop arrived at the palace hall, King Philip was angrily smashing Joan's throne. He shattered the throne with an axe, which only heightened the bishop's fear. The king informed the bishop that the pope had passed away in his sleep, and he hoped that Bishop Raymond could succeed him. He believed it was time for a Frenchman to hold the papacy, as the Italians had dominated that position for long enough. Meanwhile, Prince Louis continued to disguise himself as a Knight Templar to capture children. He went to a house under the pretext of drinking water, and the host warmly entertained him. Louis asked about his wife and children, and the host said that his wife had gone to the market and he had no son, but the baptismal file in Louis's hand showed that he had a son, so the man had to say that his son died young. When Louis was about to leave, he found that there was something wrong with the floor, and the man's wife and children were hiding underneath. When asked where the son was buried, the husband hesitated, struggling to find a suitable answer. Louis picked up a basin and began banging it, causing the baby to cry out in fright. The husband was killed, and Louis seized the child. In the palace, King Philip was sparring with his son, only to lose to him. The king was not upset about losing the duel, but rather that Landry's child had yet to be found. That child was a source of shame for him. Discussing heirs, the king also expressed concern over Prince Louis's future. He stated that if Louis couldn't have an heir due to Margaret's issues, he could always find another wife. Louis, however, firmly rejected that notion, insisting that he and Margaret were truly in love. Gawain sought out a barefoot doctor, who injected him with a potion that miraculously healed his limp. With his leg healed, Gawain pledged his loyalty to Louis, swearing fealty while holding his sword and spilling his blood as a symbol of his oath. After a long night of trekking, Landry finally arrived at the bandits' hideout. He stealthily entered the cave and quietly dispatched a sleeping thug. However, upon exiting, he spotted another target but was ambushed by a bandit who slashed his shoulder. The noise of their struggle awakened the other bandits, turning his covert mission into a chaotic brawl. Despite Landry's impressive combat skills, he was outnumbered, and a woman managed to stab him in the waist. Landry turned to flee but soon returned on his white horse, armed and ready for battle. He took down 2 enemies, but then his horse was shot, causing him to fall and tumble to the ground. Overwhelmed by the bandits, Landry was powerless to defend himself. He had not intended to return alive. Facing his impending doom, he looked up at the sky, arms outstretched, ready to embrace death. Just as a bandit raised an axe to strike him, the new recruit's captain rode in on horseback, knocking the bandits aside. He then swung his axe and sword in succession, defeating the remaining foes. Landry struggled to get back on his feet, but the captain slapped him hard, accusing him of disobeying orders by leaving the shrine. Landry replied that he had no intention of returning. He wished to die there, because the team leader once said that dying like this was a glorious way to die. He felt that he had been abandoned by God. The captain then shared his story about being imprisoned for 10 years after the fall of Acre, explaining how he had once prayed for death but instead learned that God had kept him alive for a reason. He advised Landry that even in hopeless situations, he could still rely on his faith. After reflecting on this, Landry returned to the shrine, kneeling in prayer as everyone present joined him in earnest supplication. In the pouring rain, 2 men engaged in a duel, their swordplay quickly escalating into a fistfight. They wrestled in the mud as spectators on the sidelines banged their shields in support. Soon, one man lay on the ground, unable to resist, while the crowd cheered for the fight. The Grand Master then shouted, declaring that Landry had passed the final test for new recruits.
Landry de Luzon, you have passed the last initiate ritual. It is my honor to welcome you back into the Order of Solomon Temple.
Landry finally found redemption. Meanwhile, Gawain successfully joined the French King's Guard and became a military commander. However, another commander inexplicably kicked Gawain's soldier to the ground. Gawain, new to his position, would not tolerate such disrespect. He approached the commander's horse and pulled him down. The commander, enraged, drew his sword, ready to fight, but Gawain did not even draw his sword. He did not consider the other man a threat. Watching the scene, Isabella showed interest. King Philip declared that Gawain was the key to his victory. Gawain told his soldiers that while they might not be a match for the Templars one-on-one, united under the king's name, they would be invincible. The king nodded in satisfaction at Gawain's words. The Grand Master held an initiation ceremony for Landry and the other new recruits, officially welcoming them back into the Templar Order. Landry reclaimed his original clothes and equipment, and the new commander became his brother. Just then, the bells rang, and the doors of the sanctuary opened. A cavalryman wearing a mask and with a green cross on his chest entered the city. He was a leper knight from the Order of St. Lazarus, bearing the news of the Pope's assassination. The Order of St. Lazarus was composed of lepers who were fierce on the battlefield. This news sparked a heated debate among the Templars in Chartra. Landry and Tancred believed the news to be true, as they had fought alongside this leper knight in Acre. Moreover, Landry suspected that King Philip had sent someone to assassinate the Pope. The Grand Master's old subordinates, however, dismissed the news as a rumor and accused Landry of seeking personal vengeance. The Grand Master, despite the disagreements, decided to send the news of the Pope's death back to Rome but chose not to immediately report the assassination. He emphasized that the Templars must follow the Pope's instructions and await the election of a new Pope before taking any action. After the meeting, Landry caught up with Gabriel, the leper knight, whom he had known for 25 years. Gabriel was shocked to learn that the Templars would not relay the news to Rome. He couldn't believe that the once formidable Templars had become so cautious and bound by rules. Landry explained that much had changed in the past 5 years. More than in the previous 20, he also revealed that he was no longer the commander but just an ordinary Templar in Chartra. With no other choice, Gabriel decided to go to Rome himself to deliver the news. He also revealed that the man sent by the king to kill them was a former Templar with a limp. Landry realized that Gawain was now serving the French king. Meanwhile, Gawain was dispatched by the king to eliminate the Order of St. Lazarus and was preparing to leave immediately. After Gawain's departure, King Philip convened a gathering to expose the crimes of the Templars. A woman whose husband and child had been killed by Lewis, disguised as a Templar, came forward to accuse the Templars. She claimed that a Templar had killed her husband in front of her and taken her child. The people present were amazed. When the woman was complaining excitedly, she accidentally found Lewis sitting there. The woman excitedly pointed out Lewis and said that the paladin was the man in front of her.
Yes, here. Thanks.
William noticed something was wrong. To avoid being noticed by the crowd, Lewis stepped forward, covered the woman's mouth and led her out of the palace. Landry, Tancred, the captain, and the 3 newcomers were responsible for escorting Gabriel back to his sanctuary. Along the way, they encountered many lepers seeking refuge near the sanctuary of the Order of St. Lazarus. Finally, they reached the sanctuary at night, where many leper knights were waiting with candles. During dinner, Gabriel kept his mask on, but Landry insisted he remove it. Gabriel was hesitant, fearing his appearance would make others uncomfortable. Eventually, he complied. Several recruits looked at him strangely. After dinner, Gabriel shared his story with Landry and Tancred. He revealed that he had a wife and children but had to leave them due to his leprosy, joining the order to find a new purpose in life. That night, as the Templars rested in the chapel, Landry gazed out the window, unable to sleep as he thought of his daughter Eve. The old commander noticed his restlessness and advised him to return to his daughter and fulfill his duties as a father. He reminded Landry that a child without parents is unfortunate and that his daughter needed him now more than ever. Landry was not just a Templar but also a father. As they spoke, the sound of bells rang outside. A leper knight went to open the door, and as soon as it opened, the royal guards rushed in, killing the knight with a spear. The chapel turned into a battlefield as the 2 sides clashed in the confined space. The Templars, with their superior combat skills, quickly gained the upper hand. Landry, Tancred, and the old commander fought fiercely, while the new recruits, though inexperienced, showed no signs of fear. One of the new recruits was cornered by an enemy but was saved by a woman. After defeating the initial wave of attackers, Landry and the others attempted to close the chapel doors. As they did, Landry saw Gawain outside. With the doors closed, the defenders caught a brief respite. Gawain, standing outside, read out the charges against the Order of St. Lazarus, accusing them of plotting rebellion against King Philip and declaring them enemies of France. He then ordered his men to ram the doors. Tancred observed that there were about 50 enemies outside, including archers. He warned that charging out would be suicidal. The old commander declared that he would rather die in battle than be captured again, having experienced 10 years of imprisonment. The archers outside shot flaming arrows through the windows, setting the chapel's banners on fire. Tancred quickly tore down the burning banners and stamped out the flames, while the others used their shields to protect themselves. Landry, seeing the oil from the lamps spilled on the floor, had an idea. Outside, the soldiers struggled to break down the doors. Gawain, growing impatient, joined the effort, and together they finally breached the entrance. As the royal guards rushed in, they found the Templars standing in a line, holding candles, creating an eerie atmosphere. Gawain sensed a trap and noticed the oil on the floor. He shouted for his men to stop, but it was too late. The Templars threw their candles onto the oil, setting the floor ablaze. The frontline soldiers were engulfed in flames, and Landry charged forward, his sword piercing through a burning enemy. The second wave of the battle began, with the Templars fighting with renewed vigor. The royal guards fell one by one as the flames spread throughout the chapel. Gabriel found himself in trouble as an enemy soldier pinned his sword with his arm. Just as Gabriel was about to be overwhelmed, a new recruit killed the attacker. Landry, his sword now coated in burning oil, charged at Gawain. The two clashed, their weapons sparking against each other. The chapel filled with smoke, making it difficult to see. Gawain swung his weapon wildly, while Landry parried his attacks. A burning beam collapsed, separating the two fighters. Seeing that the battle was lost, Gawain took the opportunity to retreat. After the battle, the leper knights gathered what they could salvage from the burned sanctuary. The new recruits, who had initially been wary of the lepers, now showed them kindness and respect. One of the new recruits even embraced a female leper as they said their goodbyes. Landry shook hands with Gabriel, and the remaining leper knights prepared to travel to Loire to seek the Grand Master's help. The Templar riders split into 3, and the old headmaster went to inform the other sanctuaries to strengthen their defenses. As the war had begun, the 3 new recruits went back to Chartra to report back to the Grand Master about the situation on this side. Tancred takes Landry to see his daughter to prevent King Philip from finding Eve. Before leaving, the old leader told the 3 young men that they were already Knights Templar and hoped that they would fight for justice and kill the unjust. Back at the palace in Paris, Gawain burst into the king's chamber, startling Isabella. King Philip demanded to know what had happened.
What's happened? Landry.
2 groups of Templar knights drew their swords in a standoff. On one side was Louis on horseback, and on the other side was Landry.
If neither of you are the Templar I speak of, you have nothing to fear.
My name is Tancred de Hauteville.
I'm Landry de Luzon.
Upon hearing Landry's name, Louis became extremely angry. Landry keenly observed that the cavalry before him were not Templar knights. He noticed that their horses bore cross-shaped brands, and among their weapons was a crossbow sword, a weapon the Templar knights never used. Realizing something was amiss, Landry swiftly drew his long sword, and Louis followed suit. Immediately, Louis ordered an attack. Landry and Tancred had no choice but to retreat into the monastery, quickly closing the gate. They instructed the nuns to take Eve and flee towards Chartra, knowing the wooden gate wouldn't hold for long. Landry and Tancred were ready to fight, 2 against 4. Despite being outnumbered, the battle was intense from the start. Initially, Landry and Tancred each fought 2 enemies. But the situation soon turned into a one-on-one duel between Landry and Louis. At that moment, Tancred was pushed into the basement by an enemy. During the fight, he seized the opportunity to draw the enemy's short sword and counterattack successfully. Meanwhile, Landry's battle was equally fierce. Louis's swordsmanship was clearly superior to his father Philip's. Landry was filled with confusion, wondering why Louis, whom he didn't recognize, held such hatred towards him. Just then, a knight ambushed Landry. As Landry lay on the ground, he heard the knight call Louis Prince. Seeing the nuns escape with the child, Louis hurriedly pursued them, ordering his remaining guards to kill Landry. However, Landry quickly dispatched the remaining guards. To stop Louis, Landry picked up a crossbow from the ground and chased after him. On a hill, he stopped, took aim, and shot Louis off his horse.
We have to go. Landry, come on!
Landry and Tancred rode to meet the nuns. Landry was filled with guilt, believing his actions had brought this misfortune, but Tancred comforted him by saying that if they had not come, the child might have met with an accident long ago. At this time in Paris, William was still racking his brains to find a way to frame the knights. Gawain came up with an idea. He suggested that the Knights Templar not only served the Pope but also worshipped their founding Grand Master as a deity. If they could prove this belief, the Templar Knights would be branded as heretics and could be justifiably eliminated and judged. Gawain planned to fabricate a crucial piece of evidence, a silver double-faced skull, one side depicting the founding Grand Master and the other a demon. Meanwhile, King Philip had acquired a new weapon, a cylinder filled with black powder, which, when ignited, had immense power, instantly blowing up a carriage. King Philip was amazed by the weapon's power and planned to use it to destroy the sanctuary at Chartra. Injured, Louis did not return to the palace for treatment. He believed Landry and the baby couldn't have gone far. If he returned to the palace, he might lose track of them. So, he used a heated short sword to cauterize his wound. As Louis stood up to leave, he saw the body of a nun. The 2 nuns with the child did not head directly to Chartra but entered a stone archway. This place was once a sanctuary for Jews, but King Philip had driven them all away, so no one would disturb them here. Prince Louis displayed remarkable detective skills, noticing a broken branch by the road and deducing that someone had recently passed by. Footprints and threads on the branches all pointed in one direction. Eve cried incessantly in the shelter, and the nuns couldn't console her. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and the nuns hid behind a pillar. It was Tancred's voice. The nuns relaxed, and Landry took his daughter, a rare smile on his face. The nuns and the child could finally rest. While Landry and Tancred kept watch, Landry looked at his daughter and thought of Queen Joan, filled with sadness that she would never be by her daughter's side. Just then, a voice interrupted Landry's thoughts. It was Louis, who had tracked them down using his detective skills and demanded that Landry hand over the child. It was not until this moment that Louis realized that his half-child was actually a girl. A fight ensued immediately. Louis, confident with 2 guards, challenged Landry and Tancred. Quickly, Tancred and Landry defeated the guards. Seeing the situation turn against him, Louis fled. Landry pursued Louis into a building. Louis was loading arrows into the crossbow while talking to Landry. With the crossbow ready, Louis emerged from the shadows. Under the threat of the crossbow, Landry's long sword was at a disadvantage, and he could only defend himself. He opened his hands and began to speak. Louis expressed his deep love for his mother and accused Landry of improper behavior towards her. He was outraged that Landry, after such actions, still wore the Templar Knight's uniform and enjoyed divine protection. Louis even blamed Landry for his mother's death. Landry emphasized that even if Louis killed Eve, Queen Joan would not come back to life. Louis retorted that killing Eve would make Landry suffer endlessly. Landry, emotional, said he mourned Joan every day and would give his life to bring her back. Louis, enraged, accused Landry of killing Joan. Landry, in disbelief, told Louis that it was King Philip who had killed Joan in front of his army. Louis refused to believe it, insisting his father loved his mother deeply and couldn't have done such a thing. Landry pointed out that no loving father would send his son to kill a baby. In a fit of rage, Louis fired the crossbow. Landry, prepared, dodged the arrow and counterattacked, but Louis had already disappeared. Gawain found a skilled craftsman to create the silver double-faced ornament. Next, it is time to judge the Knights Templar. They placed the ornament in a hidden spot in the Paris sanctuary. When the new Pope Raymond arrived, Gawain showed him the ornament and spun a tale. He claimed the Templar Knights secretly worshipped their founding Grand Master and a demon, making them heretics. Gawain said he left the Templar Knights because he refused to partake in their heresy. Pope Raymond, a puppet of King Philip, believed the story and immediately distanced himself from the Templar Knights. Louis rushed back to Paris and headed straight to the dungeon. There was a man in the cell whose tongue had been cut off. He was an eyewitness to the murder of Queen Joan. Although he could not speak without a tongue, he could express himself through painting. Using Louis's ring, the prisoner drew a crown with a line through it, indicating the king had killed the queen. Louis, realizing the truth, collapsed in shock and grief. Landry and Tancred returned to the sanctuary at Chartra with the nuns and the child. Now that the sisters had nowhere to go, the Grand Master agreed to let them stay in the sanctuary temporarily. The bells tolled, signaling the approach of the French army. Landry stood before 2 commanders, who nodded in acknowledgement. Landry then addressed his brothers,
Prepare for war!
preparing for the impending battle. In the military camp, King Philip kept waving the flag in his hand and all the soldiers were shouting. A new recruit of the Knights Templar on the city wall, not knowing what it was, asked an old soldier,
That's the oriflamme. Sacred war flag of France. Means no surrender, no mercy, just a fight to the death.
At this moment, the Knights Templar were ready for battle. After King Philip waved the flag, he mounted his warhorse to command the battle. He raised his right hand, and the archers drew their bows in preparation. As his arm fell, arrows rained down on the fortress like raindrops.
Here they come!
Although the Knights Templar were prepared and raised their shields, some knights were still hit by arrows. After the second wave of attacks, the French army began to assault the city, with soldiers carrying ladders to the city walls. This primitive siege device was very inefficient and the people on the city walls could easily deal with it with stones. King Philip knew that the sanctuary would not be easily taken, and these 2 ladders were just a distraction for the Knights Templar. the real siege weapon was in the hands of 6 soldiers, who carried a shield and an iron bucket to the city gate. Landry and the others had never seen this before and were wondering what they were doing when they just saw the soldiers below ignite the fuses and retreat. With a loud explosion, thick smoke billowed, and sand flew everywhere as the iron bucket exploded. Landry realized that the city gate could not withstand another attack from the iron bucket, and they had to find a way to counter it. Seeing that the enemy has put all the detonators on a wagon, Landry asks who is the strongest archer among the Templars. A paladin is at the ready, who was a good hunter before he became a knight.
God, it's at least 150 paces away.
Amidst the chaos of the battlefield, over 150 steps away, he lit an arrow, but unfortunately, the first arrow missed. Then Landry handed him a second arrow and told him not to be too nervous, to imagine it was just like hunting. French soldiers kept climbing the city walls, and the situation was dire for the Knights Templar. When the knight shot the second arrow, it perfectly hit one of the fuses on the wagon. Thus, the Knights Templar achieved a temporary victory. King Philip roared in anger, venting his frustration.
Your father taught you well!
Never lost faith in you, brother. Never.
Before the main army attacked, the Pope had come to persuade them to surrender. The Grand Master met with Pope Raymond and believed his promise of a fair trial. Eventually, the Grand Master took some of the Knights Templar and surrendered their weapons. But a fair trial did not exist, and after the crowd arrived at the French barracks, the Pope changed his tune. He ordered the Grand Master to reveal the secrets of the sanctuary at Chartra, including the location of the treasures and hidden doors. Only then did the Grand Master see the true colors of the Pope and the King, but it was too late. After the first assault failed, King Philip did not retreat. He ordered his craftsmen to build a siege tower. 4 or 5 craftsmen worked quickly, and once completed, the advantage of the sanctuary's walls would be lost. The siege tower could hold about 60 people at a time, and to stop its attack, the knights would need to redeploy defenders from other walls. A siege tower is not like a detonator, and hitting it with a flaming arrow will not immediately set it on fire. Moreover, the enemy could cover the siege tower with fresh animal hides, making it impossible to set on fire. This is the method used by the enemy during the defense of Acre City. Therefore, Landry suspected that this plan must have been devised by Gawain. Due to the lack of manpower to defend against the siege tower, Landry proposed a preemptive strike. They took advantage of the night and secretly exited through a hidden door, splitting into 2 teams. One team would distract the enemy, while the other would burn the siege tower when the enemy's defenses were weak. At this moment, King Philip was in his tent talking with Prince Louis. He asked Louis how things were going, but Louis reported that Landry had escaped. The king said he already knew because he had seen Landry on the city wall. Then, Louis lied and said that Landry's child had been killed by him. The king was overjoyed, as he believed eliminating Joan and Landry's child was more important than killing Landry himself. The team tasked with creating a distraction killed a patrolman and then set fire to a tent in the French camp. Landry and a few others reached the siege tower, quickly took out the guards, and set it ablaze. However, the small team creating the distraction was surrounded. Landry heard his brother's cries and wanted to go back to save them, but Tancred stopped him. Tancred insisted that they could not let the hidden door be discovered, or their brother's sacrifices would be in vain. In the Paris palace, Princess Isabella had a new dress made. Her maid asked if there was a special occasion, and the princess said she was having dinner with the future queen, Margaret. Over time, the two had become as close as sisters, and Margaret, unsuspecting, drank the wine offered to her. The princess called for 2 male servants, and as Margaret tried to leave, she collapsed due to the drug's effects. Isabella used Margaret's trust to frame her. It was not until Margaret's maid arrived that the two men left, making the maid a witness. When the princess sent the servants away, she gave them a special ring. After the deed was done, the two men were killed by Isabella. A brother from the Knights Templar was captured and locked up with the Grand Master. The Grand Master had endured much torture. The newly initiated knight, terrified by the sight of the torture instruments, revealed the location of the hidden door. Gawain led his men to the hidden door, placed a fuse, and lit it. The knights in the sanctuary were completely unaware of this until the explosion was heard, at which point they realized something was wrong. Landry rushed to find his daughter, Eve, knowing the sanctuary was about to fall. Gawain and the French soldiers stormed in, and without the protection of the city walls, the Knights Templar were outnumbered. Gawain rushed to the city tower and prepared to open the iron gate. Waiting for him was a commander who had once fought alongside him in Acre, but now they were enemies. Gawain quickly defeated him and lifted the iron gate. Landry led the two nuns and the child to a dark room. He held his daughter tightly, not wanting to let go, knowing this might be their last goodbye. Gawain opened the city gate, and countless soldiers poured into the sanctuary, engaging in fierce combat with the Knights Templar. Outnumbered dozens to one, the Knights Templar had only their faith to rely on. As Landry hid the child and stepped outside, he saw King Philip on horseback. He leaped from the tower, tackling Philip to the ground. Landry attacked Philip, who struggled to defend himself. Prince Louis joined the fray, torn between avenging his mother and aiding his father. Landry knocked Philip down and held the sword in both hands for the final blow. At this critical moment, Louis chose to help his father. He swung the sword at Landry's arm, and Philip took the opportunity to scratch Landry's leg. Tancred rushed to help, but Philip already had his knife at Landry's throat. King Philip demanded the Knights Templar surrender, or he would kill Landry. However, Landry urged his brothers to keep fighting. Tancred could not bear to see his brother die and dropped his sword. In the end, the Knights Templar surrendered, but instead of a fair trial, they faced false accusations and betrayal. On October 13, 1307, captured Knights Templar were transporting chopped wood to a square in Paris. This wood was intended to seal their fate. A large crowd of citizens gathered in the square to witness the trial. William listed the crimes allegedly committed by the Knights Templar. The Grand Master refuted these accusations, claiming they were lies fabricated by the king to destroy the Templar Order. William was waiting for them to refute so that he could call a witness. This witness was the Templar Knight who was captured before. He not only revealed the location of the secret door of the Chartra sanctuary, but also became a witness to accuse all the Templar Knights. Facing the townspeople and his brethren, the witness claimed that upon joining the Templars, he was ordered to spit on a holy relic and bow to a silver skull with two faces. William produced this so-called evidence at the opportune moment. Betrayed by one of their own, Landry and the others had no chance of exoneration in this meticulously planned trial. The first to be led to the stake was Grand Master Jacques de Molay. Despite his vehement denials of the false charges, his fate was sealed. As the 23rd and final Grand Master of the Knights Templar, de Molay walked to the stake himself. After the firewood under his feet was ignited, he angrily denounced the Pope, saying that he was not worthy to sit on the holy chair of St. Peter, because it was the Pope who personally handed over the power of the Church to the power of the king. Engulfed in flames, de Molay lamented not heeding his brother's advice to resist King Philip, instead choosing to trust the Pope. He then cursed both the Pope and King Philip, prophesying that they would die within a year and a day, and that King Philip's bloodline would no longer rule France. The last Grand Master of the Knights Templar was consumed by the Inferno. The persecution of the Templars continued. Tancred was tortured for information about the Templars' treasure, but he revealed nothing. King Philip, seeking the gold, ordered salt to be poured on Tancred's wounds, but Tancred endured. King Philip personally chopped wood, intending to use it to burn his former friend Landry. At this time, Princess Isabella came to the king with Margaret's personal maid. The maid told King Philip that she saw two men walking out of Margaret's room. The king was very angry when he heard about it. He did not tell Louis about this, but went directly to Margaret's room. The soldiers successfully searched her room and found evidence, a special ring.
Please, Your Highness, I would never betray you. I would never betray my husband. No, please. This has been a mistake. There's been a horrible mistake.
With evidence in hand, Margaret was locked up in the tower. She was put in chains and her hair was cut off. Meanwhile, a new prisoner arrives in Landry's cell. Landry asks if he is a Templar brother.
Do I know you, brother?
If you did, you wouldn't call me that.
The man turns out to be Gawain. Landry thought Gawain was the king's spy and that this was a self-torture trick to find out the whereabouts of the gold. Gawain said that this was not the case. He said that he found Landry's daughter when he went to look for the gold. He then learned that King Philip sent the prince to kill the child, and he was very angry about it. Because it was despicable to attack innocent children, he helped the nuns and the children escape, and also wanted to kill King Philip. But William took the opportunity to open the door of the interrogation room and turn the situation around. Gawain was outnumbered and eventually arrested. His assassination attempt failed, and he lost his titles, reputation, and was crippled once more. Tancred witnessed it all. This meant that the child was still alive, which was also a comfort to Landry. Princess Isabella goes to visit Margaret. Margaret still thinks of the princess as a sister, not realizing that it was all Isabella's doing. She doesn't hide it and flat out says that this is all a ploy on her part. Isabella even says it's because of Margaret's self-righteousness, and that she's been merciful to put up with her so far. Margaret poses as the mistress of the house before she's even queen. Upon hearing her words, Margaret kneels down and apologizes to Isabella, but Isabella does not soften her heart.
I told you, Margaret of Burgundy, France was not kind to queens.
King Philip prepared a torture device for Landry and demonstrated its use. Landry, however, was more concerned with revealing to Prince Louis how King Philip had murdered Queen Joan. Louis is furious when he hears this and beats up Landry. King Philip, worried that the instruments he had prepared would not be used, hurriedly dragged Louis out. He then prepares to torture Landry. King Philip told Landry his story about his brother named Louis and how the two brothers were very close. His brother was supposed to be the successor to the throne, but he died before he was old enough, and in honor of his brother, King Philip named his son Louis as well. He stated that he was telling this to tell Landry that he had thought of him as his brother. However, he never expected that Landry would take away his beloved. Landry also responded,
I can take what you already lost.
King Philip stopped talking and just turned the torture device. He wanted Landry to beg for mercy, but failed. King Philip didn't want Landry to die like this. He still wanted to burn Landry to death, and even let Landry watch others being burned to death. Prince Louis came to Margaret's room. but heard the crying of Margaret's maid. Through the maid's narration, he learned that his wife was imprisoned. Furious, he rushed to the tower, killing 2 guards, but lacking the key, he confronted his father. The king expressed sympathy for his son's experience, saying that both father and son had been betrayed. He said that he had shown mercy by not killing Margaret. Louis did not believe that his wife would betray him, and even drew his sword against his father, saying that he would solve the matter. King Philip slapped Louis and told him that everything Louis had was given by him, and if he could give, he could also take. Prince Louis had no way to deal with it. In the crowded square of Paris, the Templars were led to their execution. The former traitor suddenly rushed out of the crowd as he watched his brothers being burned to death. He wanted to retract his previous testimony, saying that he had confessed under torture by the king. However, his actions did not change anything, but instead cost him his life. King Philip walked up to Landry and told him that the firewood under his feet was chopped by him himself, which was considered a special treatment. The bell rang and William, torch in hand, lit the others' piles of firewood in turn. Only lastly did he come to Landry and light the firewood at his feet. As the flames burned, Landry slowly closed his eyes. A carriage stopped at the execution ground, and after the curtain was lifted, Talus' crossbow was aimed at King Philip. Seeing this, King Philip stood frozen in shock. Fortunately, the captain of the guard reacted quickly and rushed forward to block the crossbow arrow. The rescue effort was led by Gabriel and the leprous knights, causing chaos at the scene. Amidst the turmoil, only the red-robed cardinal remained calm. The leper knights rescued everyone, and Talus asked them to take refuge in the sanctuary while continuing to shoot crossbow arrows. Each bolt found its mark, with one even striking 2 men. After exhausting his bolts, Talus rode away on horseback. The execution site was left with only a few burning stakes still aflame. King Philip, gazing at the smoldering stakes and listening to the city's bells, felt particularly irritated. He ordered William to lock down all of Paris and prevent the news from spreading. He then dispatched Louis with a contingent of soldiers to capture the Templars. The Templars, discovered by a young boy, were found hiding in the sanctuary. The boy immediately informed King Philip, who ordered William to gather more soldiers and siege weapons. Landry and his companions had planned to escape through a secret tunnel, but it had been sealed off. They realized it must have been blocked after they had used it to retrieve the gold. Outside, the battering ram began to pound on the sanctuary's gates, quickly breaching the outer door. The army stormed in, leaving the Templars with no options. Gawain suggested an escape route, albeit an unpleasant one. With the battering ram attacking the final door, Landry and the others had no time to hesitate. Suddenly, a woman's voice cried out. Landry instructed the others to go ahead while he and Tancred investigated. The woman had been imprisoned by Louis and revealed that he had killed her husband and child. Landry decided to help her. As King Philip stormed the sanctuary, Landry and the others escaped through a sewer tunnel. Emerging into an alley, they encountered William and his reinforcements. A fierce battle ensued, with the injured Templars fighting valiantly against the royal guards. Gawain, despite his injured leg, fought with a makeshift club. Tancred, cornered by an enemy, was saved by the woman they had rescued. The nun led the severely wounded Templars to safety. As the battle raged on, William brought in more soldiers. If this continues, the Templars' physical strength will be exhausted sooner or later. Gawain swung his sword and cut the ropes that bound the wooden frame, leaving half of the enemies in the alley. The Templars scattered, with Landry and Gawain easily evading William's pursuit. However, they encountered Lewis, who had been tasked with capturing Talus but was reluctant to follow his father's orders, because he has more important things to do. Lewis ordered his soldiers to search for the Templars instead. Just then, he saw Landry hiding by the wall. Back at the palace, King Philip was enraged and took out his frustration on William, blaming him for the current situation. William, despite his calculations, was beaten and ordered to continue the pursuit of the Templars. Tancred, with nowhere else to go, sought refuge at the home of the woman they had rescued. Unfortunately, her emotional outburst upon returning home alerted the patrolling soldiers, putting them in grave danger. Landry and Gawain made their way to the workshop where the silver skulls were made. Gawain removed the nail from his knee and cauterized the wound with a hot iron. Landry expressed his gratitude to Gawain for saving his daughter. Gawain replied that he had done so to avoid serving a tyrant. Soldiers kicked open the door, but the woman, disguised in a cloak, claimed to be mourning her child who had been killed by the Templars. Then she told the soldiers that they were praying for King Philip to bring the murderer to justice. Gabriel hid in the cellar, and Tancred also held his sword tightly in his hand, ready to fight back at any time. But the soldier squad leader suddenly stopped and they had a scare and managed to defuse the crisis. While there is no crisis on Landry's side, he and Gawain are fighting over who caused the current situation. Landry says that Gawain's betrayal caused it, and Gawain says that Landry's actions caused it. The two wrestled and almost drew the patrolling soldiers over. The nun and the two new recruits found themselves lost in an alley, where they encountered Talus disguised as a beggar. As they followed him to the main road, a woman spotted them and alerted the patrol. Talus ordered the new recruits to retreat while he engaged the enemy with his sword. Prince Louis opens the door to the tower with an axe, and when he comes to Margaret, she has slit her wrists with pieces of broken bowl. Louis suffers from the loss of his mother and wife, two women he loves, one after the other. He wailed in agony in the tower, and it was his father, King Philip, who caused both tragedies. Talus, though gravely injured, emerged victorious from his battle, his sword stained with blood. Despite his limp, he had defeated all his opponents. The next morning, Landry climbed onto a rooftop, a signal used by the Templars to locate each other when separated. He spotted Tancred and the new recruits, who had survived the night. Landry proposed a daring plan to infiltrate the palace via the river. He led them to a hidden passage he had used during his secret meetings with Queen Joan. They successfully entered the palace but encountered a patrol near the river. A fierce battle ensued in the narrow corridor, with the Templars fighting their way through. As they defeated the last guard, the nun was struck by an arrow. Tancred could only retreat with her in his arms. At the dock, the king's guards were loading supplies onto a ship when the Templars attacked. Tancred was walking at the end of the line, holding the nun, when a cold arrow came from the city wall and hit Tancred in the leg. Just then, another arrow hits the nun again. Tancred desperately crawls to the nun, and Landry tries to go to their rescue, but the crossbowman doesn't give him a chance. King Philip arrived at the dock just as the ship set sail. He ordered his soldiers to pursue Landry with every available vessel. In the palace, an angry King Philip looks at a field of gold and silver, chagrined. He felt that no amount of treasure would mean as much as Landry's head. William remarked that at least the treasure could pay off their debts. Suddenly, a voice rings out. Turns out it's Landry, and he's back to avenge Queen Joan. Prince Louis draws his sword and walks towards Landry. Landry calls out his name and Louis tosses aside the longsword pointed at Landry.
Should have been kinder.
He looks to his father.
Louis? As you reminded me,
King Philip looked at William.
the king is dead. I am worthless. Long live the king.
Then, William bowed to Prince Louis and left. The king was really alone, and he could only draw his sword to fight. Facing the injured Landry, he felt that he seemed to have a chance of winning, but the reality was cruel. Landry's anger made him full of strength, and he beat Philip to dodge everywhere, after throwing various objects continuously. Philip's weapon was knocked off and his abdomen was scratched. Philip lost the ability to fight back and was pierced from the back by the long sword. It was just like the scene in Landry's dream, except that the person lying on the ground was not himself, but Philip. Landry pressed the sword to Philip's chest.
God has forsaken me.
Do you see the blue? My darling. And the horses. Can you see the foal?
I can see.
Will you bring our child?